Good afternoon, everyone. Yate. I'm just letting a few individuals join, so I'm going to get started in a few seconds, but I'll give us about 20 seconds. I hope everyone is doing fine out there, keeping warm. If you're in the Midwest, we're starting to get snow again, so it's been really nice. We had a very white Thanksgiving. I think snow came a little earlier. So I remember, I don't think it showed up too early last year, but it was exciting for all the kids. My kids really enjoyed it. All right. Well, good afternoon, Yada, everyone. My name is Corina Sabicu. I am hosting our Indigenous Health Topics conversation today. I am a senior program coordinator with our community outreach and engagement research, and I focus on our Native American research outreach efforts here at Mayo Clinic. And I'm up here located in Rochester, Minnesota, but I am Danae and Jemez Pueblo from Shiprock, New Mexico. All right, let's see. Just making sure. I'm going to jump into our housekeeping items today. So we are going to have some time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. Please add any questions that you may have throughout the presentation to our Q&A button or feature that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. That'll just help to um, keep the questions organized. And then, as always, it's really nice to see where everyone is logging in from across the country. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, add your organization, the role that you play, tribal affiliation, and location. All right, and welcome everybody. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I am in person helping out our guest speakers today. Our guest speakers are Betty Smith and Shirley Gersing. They are the founders of Celebrate Dakota Mayo Employee Resource Group. It's always good to be in the room with them and hear the stories that they have to share. Today, they will be focused on sharing their journey of cultural reconnection. My sister and I, that is the title of their presentation, and here's a photo of them. So I'm going to be kind of helping them in the background. I'm the tech person pretty much here today. But thank you all for joining us. And I will stop sharing and jump over to help them pull up their PowerPoint. All right. If you guys want to introduce yourself.
Okay.
So we can't see ourselves.
Well, welcome everybody. Hello, all my relatives. I live in Rochester, Minnesota. I was born and raised here. I lived in San Diego for 7 years and moved my poor hubby from California to Minnesota in 1976, and we raised our kids here. My mom, was born and raised in North Dakota on the Spirit Lake Indian Reservation. And my dad was Norwegian. Both were born in North Dakota. I was married for 52 years. My husband passed away in 2021. We have 3 children and 7 grandchildren, and I've worked at Mayo for 38 years now. I am retired, but I still work supplemental in HR.
And hello, my relatives. I greet you today with a good heart. Shirley Amakiapi. I've lived in Rochester for pretty much all my life, except for a few years when I left to go to college in both Mankato, Minnesota, and Minneapolis. Um, so like Betty said, our mother was from the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation, and our grandmother on our mother's side was French Canadian and Ojibwe or Anishinaabe. And also our great grandma was Cree from Canada. I'm a grandma with 12 grandchildren, and they all live here in Rochester. And I was an employee at Mayo for 32 plus years before retiring. And I'm married for 52 years. And we wanted to read a Dakota prayer. Our Dakota elders always said Dakota prayers aren't really written down. They're just spoken from the heart. But we found this on the internet on the Spirit Lake website years ago and really enjoyed it. So we've tweaked it just a little bit, and I'm going to read it to you because we've been told we should really start each event with a prayer. Grandfather, Great Spirit, look upon your children, the Spirit Lake Oyate, and all those attending the program here today, that they may face the winds and walk the good road to the day of quiet. Grandfather, Great Spirit, fill us with the light, give us the light, give us the strength to understand and the eyes to see. Teach us to walk the soft earth as relatives to all that live. Help us, for without you, we are nothing.
We always like to dedicate this to our little sister Pamela Ives Delk. She lives in Virginia now. And to our parents, Burnett and Nora Jetty Ives. This is a picture from back in the day. And the picture of the three girls was taken at my 50th wedding anniversary. So we always feel bad that Pam isn't able to go with us on our journey, but we always share everything with her. So welcome to all our relatives. We're happy to see you and happy to share our story. This is the objectives of our program. We're going to do a little introduction, which we just did. We'll do some family history, why all the tears you'll see as we go on, and how our journey started in 2001 after our mother passed away, and how we started Celebrate Dakota Merge, Mayo Employee Resource Group, and different Native education programs and events that we've worked on.
Growing up in Rochester, Minnesota in the 50s and beyond, it was okay to be Norwegian, but you never mentioned that you had Dakota or Sioux blood. Betty even has a kindergarten school picture that has two darker skinned kids in it, and the young boy along with Betty, they were both Dakota, but no one ever was able to talk about it.
Our community was not very diverse at that time. This is a picture of us when we were little, and as you can see, our mother let us go outside and play every day in the summer. And so we always can't believe how tan we were. We'll take turns with this one. Living in Rochester, our mom and our Aunt Sarah, who lived in Rochester also with her three kids, every Sunday night we would have a little lunch or dinner with them. And the mom and Sarah would always tell stories. And you know how when you're a kid, sometimes the stories you just think, oh my gosh, I've heard this 100 times. Let's get on with this. But I'm sure glad they told us all these stories because some of them were really, really hilarious and others were very touching. And so we're glad that it stayed with us somehow. And mom worked at the Mayo Plummer Building Library in the 50s. And she also worked for 28 years in the for the Federal Aviation Agency at the Rochester Airport, which is about 10 miles from Rochester. And she always said it's way more fun to go in the ditch with somebody in the car with you because sometimes the roads were bad. And we always laughed at that. I think she only went in the ditch once in 28 years. My mom had Parkinson's for 20 years. It was diagnosed when she kept having trouble typing. She was a very 100 words a minute on the old-fashioned typewriters. And she kept sending her typewriter in to get fixed. And they kept sending it back and saying, okay, we fixed it. And she did that about 3 times and then realized maybe it wasn't the typewriter, maybe it was her. So she was diagnosed with Parkinson's and moved to a retirement home in 1991. And when she passed away in 2001, we had the funeral at Madonna Towers and retirement home. And she had told Shirley, and do you want to tell the
Sure.
story?
She had just told me before she passed away, about the week before, that she was so relieved and happy that she had lived at Madonna Towers for quite a long time, and nobody there knew that she was Dakota or grew up on an Indian reservation. And so she was extremely embarrassed, and it was hard for her to talk about that because of the boarding schools she had gone to. And at the funeral, my mom and dad, had both passed away at that time. And during the funeral, her brother and sister came that actually, she's from a family of 10 kids. And the oldest, or some of the kids over time were not affected as much in the later years by the boarding schools, and they actually stayed connected in a very positive way to Native American communities they were in. So they came to the funeral and they started telling stories and saying, in the Dakota way this and in the Dakota way that. And we looked at each other, my sisters and I, and said, oh my gosh, isn't it terrible that mom would be so ashamed of the situation and people knowing now that she passed away? But her whole life she was ashamed of being Dakota, which is the same as the Sioux, but they prefer the Dakota name now. Also, she was taken away from her parents at age 5 and forced to go to either Catholic or U.S. government school, boarding schools, until she graduated from high school. And she and her siblings were allowed to go home in the summer, but a lot of their fellow schoolmates did not get to go home. They didn't have that privilege, so they stayed there all year long. And when she finished her undergraduate schooling, she had an excellent education, especially the Catholic education was very good. But the Indian was pretty much beat out of them, so they couldn't hardly speak about it. They were totally embarrassed to tell anyone of their Dakota roots. And even a little sideline is that when they entered the service during World War II, she was told by the recruiter, don't tell anyone you are Dakota, or there might be serious repercussions.
And that's when our journey begins, because we decided you shouldn't be 79 years old and pass away and be embarrassed of who you are. And we wanted to find out the truth of what really happened. So that's when we began our journey. This is our parents' history. It's kind of fun to compare and contrast. My mom, Nora Celia Jetty Ives, was Dakota. She was born in 22. My dad, Burnett Alban Ives, was Norwegian and born in 1916. Both born in North Dakota, mom on the Spirit Lake Dakota Reservation and dad in Tioga, North Dakota. Mom was the oldest of 11 children and dad was the youngest of 8. They were forced Catholic and forced to boarding schools in my mom's family. My dad was Lutheran and went to public schools in Tioga, North Dakota. Tioga was a Norwegian farming community. A lot of the relatives from Norway migrated from Norway to Quebec to Wisconsin, Minnesota, and then they went to North Dakota. Both were in the Navy. Well, both were in the service during World War II. Dad was in the Army, mom was in the Navy. And they both, after the war, ended up at the Fargo Business College and they met there and married and moved to Rochester in 1948. Mom was a Democrat, dad was Republican, and mom died at the age of 79. Dad died in 76 at the young age of 59. All the men in my dad's family had heart attacks when they were 40. And so they had they all did eventually die from heart attacks. My dad had a heart attack when he was 40, and so he could have died then, but lived to be 59. So we were always happy that he lived at least till 59, which seems very young now that I'm older. And so I'll continue.
Here's a picture of our mom's family from long ago. Let's see, the man sitting on the left is Grandpa Frank Stay Jr. And her father is in the back row on the right with the arrow pointing to him. And then just for your information, there's our grandma sitting down, little small lady. She's the grandma Julia, who was Cree. And
From Canada.
And then the young lady with the dress on in the front is my mom called her Auntie Anna Jane, and she is Leonard Peltier's, is it grandmother?
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was always very embarrassed of the AIM people and Leonard. When we were little, they were just, embarrassed to be Dakota in the first place. And so they were embarrassed of anybody that stood up for anything too. So anyway, later in life, we got to know some of those people with AIM. We never did get to know Leonard yet, but we're not embarrassed of him.
And I should say that the Turtle Mountain people call their grandma and grandpas mush 'em and cook 'em. So that's who we always talked about, mush 'em and cook 'em. And my mom always said she was the oldest granddaughter of her son. And my mom was spoiled by my grandma. She would put a warm iron underneath the blankets and in the wintertime and warm up her little feet. And she just, but I think she also, she just loved our mom. She was her favorite, she always said. Here's a picture of our dad's side of the family, the Norwegians. On the one side is the young kids of their family, and the other side is as they were adults. And our dad is the little boy. He was the youngest one, sitting on his dad's lap. And on the other side, he's the second from the right.
Mhm. Oh, and just to let you know, one little story was that the tallest gentleman, our uncle in the back
Jalmer.
back row, Jalmer, he didn't tell our cousin, he and his wife didn't tell our cousin that we had Dakota blood until he was 17 because he knew he wouldn't be able to handle it.
Which we found out much later in life, and we were shocked to hear that story. But the thing is the Norwegians were in the middle of the Dakota War, the Dakota uprising, and so they had a little different angle on the war than the Dakota did, of course. This is our mom's side of the family. They proudly wore their Navy wave uniforms in this picture. And one of the aunties, Aunt Julie, was not in the picture. So they had, and then one of the babies died when she was 3 months old. So anyway, they were a big family. And then they also, this other picture was at their 50th wedding anniversary.
Mhm. I was just gonna say that our mom just was so happy and joyful that she had the opportunity to join the service and be a secretary in Washington, D.C. during the war. And when she got done with the service, she and her sister were asked if they could please re-enlist and they would send them to Hawaii. And they both said, "Oh no, we got to get back to North Dakota. We're just really homesick for North Dakota." So
just forget Hawaii. But I was also going to say that Mom and her sister Sarah, the other one in the Navy uniform, were like twins. Mom was 5 when she was taken to the boarding school, and Sarah was 4. She was crying and crying when they came to get Mom. And my mom asked, "Can she go with me?" And my grandpa said, "Well, as long as you take care of her, she can." So she went when she was 4 years old. Can you imagine looking at your grandchildren or kids? Oh my goodness. But anyway, so they followed each other all through their life. They both ended up after the war, and I think they both went to Fargo Business College. And they moved to Rochester, married Norwegians, each had 3 kids, and they were like twins their whole life. So we always love that story. This is pictures of them when they were in the Navy and the Army.
and then my dad was in the tank battalion unit, and he was in a lot of serious battles. And when we think about it, it's just amazing that he even got back home alive. He had the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart in the Army, and he did have nightmares all the time, but he seemed to be pretty stable person. Also, when my mother was in Washington, D.C., she and her sister were just horrified because when they had to go to work, they'd take the bus. They just could not understand why all the Black people had to get on the back of the bus and go way far in the back. And they had almost never seen even Black people on the reservation in North Dakota, but they just felt so sorry that these people were treated like that. And they said they were scared that if anyone found out they were Indian, they would be told to go to the back of the bus also, or they wouldn't even be able to get on the bus. That's how bad they felt about being Native American.
They remembered what the recruiter said. They were afraid to tell anybody. So we wanted to find out, after all her funeral, and we knew that she was Native American, but she did not talk about it to other people. She did not want anyone else to know. Um, Now my Aunt Sarah, I think she told everybody, but my mom didn't. Um, and the one thing we found out was she felt so bad later in life. She would cry and was pretty depressed. And I think she realized later on, especially after having kids of her own, how much she lost being away from her family all those years, all those months when she was in school. She was never proud of her heritage. She cried over many, many stories that she would tell us, but there was several that stayed with us. Two little boys ran away from the boarding school in the winter, and they were found later in the springtime in the cornfield or whatever field. After, so they passed away. She cried about those poor little boys. And then I'll let Shirley tell the other story that stayed with
Let's
us about
see.
the elders.
Oh, yeah, there were some elders. There was a story about some elders that had a meeting and somebody brought a little container of something to drink and they each had a little drink and then they all died. And so it was just a shocking thing. And some people thought they committed suicide and some people thought they were just trying to drink alcohol. Well, it happened to be poison, so they all died, but it was accidental. But she felt so bad because all these elders were not allowed to be buried in the Catholic cemetery. And so she would cry about that. She thought that was so terrible. But later, the Catholic Church moved the fence. So they took care of that.
Mhm.
She felt better.
But she had many stories. She even wrote a little book. So we have that. When I was a teenager, she'd always ask me, "Where are you going?" And I'd say, "What are you going to do? Why don't you just write a book?" And she did write a book. I was kind of a snotty teenager.
And one important, just one note is that the boarding school where they went when they were young was within walking distance to the where they lived. So there, she said she was so heartsick to have the parents right close by and not be able to see them.
Mhm.
Whereas some kids were heartsick because they were so far away from home, way across the United States at a bigger boarding school. Here's just a picture that I got from a speaker that came to Winona, Minnesota one time and was giving some history, Native American history. He was chief from Canada, and he just gave us this early explorers buffalo people map. It was from the 15 and 1600s. And this is mostly Canada, but you can't see all of the map, but it went all the way down through United States and down even into Florida. But just to let you know how vast of wonderful land that the Native Americans, Lakota, Dakota, lived on. And then right before the war, they were, because of some treaties, they were restricted to a little tiny area 10 miles from the Minnesota, on either side of the Minnesota River in Minnesota. And they were not allowed to have the ability to provide for themselves anymore. And so it was a very bad situation.
Mhm. Well, we also learned about the hanging, the largest mass hanging in American history, which nobody really ever talks about. Some people we met, well, even in Minnesota, didn't even know that took place in Minnesota. On December 26th, 1862. And I think you can see the picture. It just seems weird that you'd have Christmas and then a whole bunch of people would come and watch some people get hung. And so every year they do have a memorial. They have writers that come, and there's a movie about what happened actually called The Dakota 38 Plus 2. And it's on YouTube for free. You can Google it
Or web,
or
web.
on the website.
Dakota.
Yeah, and so if you want to get more information on what happened, it's a very, very good story. Very sad, but it helps to make you understand what happened. This is a picture of Mom's school, and if you'll notice, all the little kids have the same haircut. They didn't have uniforms because I think they got all their, it looks like they all had little ties on, but they got their clothes from missions donations. And Mom went to the Little Flower Indian School, mission school in North Dakota, the Fort Totten Indian Boarding School in North Dakota, and also Marty Indian Mission in South Dakota, where our aunt ended up. She became a nun and worked there for many years, and we're so proud of her. She did a good job. She was a very good mentor to us. This is a picture of the dormitory, if you can imagine. At Fort Totten, Mom said she could hear little girls crying. I just can't imagine how scary it would be for these kids to be taken away and just live in a dormitory. So that was an eye opener. I never thought about it. Here's a picture of the Fort Totten boarding school schedule. Now, I don't know if you can see this very well, but it starts at 5:45 and goes all the way to 9. And you have all these things that you had to do. They would go to school and then they would also work and learn trades, I guess. And but I think half the day they would go to school and then they would go to work even. And so anyway, what a life, huh? When you're kids.
And she also said, well, for the Catholic school, some of the nuns were really, really sweet, and some were very, very hard to be with, and talked very demeaningly to the children. So, and then this one, the Fort Totten one, she was only there for a year. But she said it wasn't quite as good education wise as the Catholic school, she noticed, but very regimented.
And so we decided that we needed to figure out what happened. And all the time when my mom was alive, she kept talking about how she wanted to meet her cousin Blossom. And we finally connected and went to Sisseton, South Dakota, and got to meet our relatives. And the nice thing about their story is that they were able to stay at their reservation and go to school and come home every night. So they were with their elders and learned the stories and the history and the oral education history. And so Blossom's the one in the wheelchair, and Catherine's on the right-hand side. And my son Jordan got to go with us, and our Aunt Sarah was alive then, and so she was able to go. It was a wonderful meeting, and we learned a lot. Believe me, we had so many stories that I wish I could just move to Sisseton and learn the language. So they learned the language too. That's where we're missing out on that. But anyway, it's a cute memory. Here's our family history story about how when our grandfather, well, let's see, I think he's pictured in a couple slides back, but anyway, my my he was a French, well, my grandfather, wait, great grandfather was from Canada, and he married an Indian, the tribe in honor, an honor marriage. It was a big honor for her to marry this French fur trader. And they had two children, Josephine and Frank, and then all of a sudden the war started. And Frank was eating his breakfast, and some of our great grandma's Hunka came and told him he better get out of here because we're having a war right now. So the young men came, and they were gonna try to get her kids too because they were half breeds. And she stood her ground and told them she knew their parents and that they better just get out of here. And so little Frank Sr. jumped out the window and fled and ended up going with Sibley's people. And so he was fighting against the natives who had been his family, welcomed into the native family. And so it was, I'm sure it was just a different time those days. Anyway, our grandma, Annie Hunka, was assisted by her cousin, White Dog, and she fled on to Canada on foot with her children and family dog. And the story I remember them telling us is she had to travel at night because in the wide open prairie, you could see people walking there. And she was afraid that the army or the people from the war would try to kill them. So she would sleep in the daytime somehow. I don't know how, but they had to travel at night on foot. Frank Sr. ended up with the Renville Rangers under Sibley, and he remarried. We'll show you a picture of that shortly. Cecilia Campbell, and there is a book called Through Dakota Eyes where they share their stories about that time. And Anna Hunka and her daughter Josephine ended up living in Sisseton, South Dakota. Frank Sr., the French fur traders ended up in Montevideo, Minnesota, and Frank Jr. settled in Devil's Lake where our mom was born.
They also told us that this gentleman here, Frank Stay Sr., they called him Stay because they couldn't say the last name Jetty. It was Jettee, and they didn't have, was it they couldn't say that name, so they said Stay.
But I think it means little finger in Dakota. Because he was short, I guess. And so they called him Frank Stay.
But we have been told by an aunt that he had a homestead near Granite Falls where the war started in the 1862 Dakota-US War. And so she said she saw a sign on the road. So we went traveling and we went and found that sign, and we were standing next to the sign in these people's driveway, and they came up and said, "What can we help you with?" And we said, "Well, we're looking for Frank Stay's homestead," which the sign actually said. And they invited us into their house, which is the house in this picture. And on their wall was this picture of our relative. And he had worked for Sibley and actually was a bodyguard of Sibley, we've been told. And then after the war, he married Cecilia Campbell, and she's sitting next to him with one of their grandkids. But he's in the front row, and the governor of Minnesota was there, and all these people that loved him on his 85th birthday, and I was very offended because I saw that down there on the bottom of the picture. It says Old Indian Fighter celebrates the 85th birthday among friends of a lifetime, and that was in 1822.
22. One other story is when we did find the house, we went to a place called Madison, Minnesota, and we went to the History Center and asked them if they had any information on Frank's Day. And they said, well, gosh, we just finished a whole week celebration for him. And they had all this information on his life. But they had no idea we were from his first marriage, and they didn't even know he was married before. So I sent all our information to them so they could have the full story. But it was kind of funny that they really celebrated him, and our mom loved him. She always talked about him, and later on, we thought, well, gosh, he just left his wife and 2 kids and let them go whatever. And then he goes off and gets married. So anyway, those were different times. Here's a picture of our great, great, great grandfather, Patewakon Najin, Standing Sacred Buffalo. We found this article in a magazine. We knew the publisher of this magazine. And they found this picture that the government took, I'm sure, in some archives, and I think it was in Washington, D.C. And so that's a picture of him. And our mom never knew this story, I don't think. And so
he was Yankton
Sioux from South Dakota.
Mhm.
And here's a picture Shirley shares.
Yeah, on our journey, a friend of mine, just out of the blue, gave me a group of artwork pictures, and he said that he went to a museum in Milwaukee, and in Milwaukee they had a bunch of photos that they took of a young Dakota man named Red Hawk, and they found his ledger at Wounded Knee, and he probably was killed at that time at Wounded Knee, but one of the soldiers found his ledger, kept it, and somehow it got to the Milwaukee Museum, and they took pictures of all the pictures in the ledger and gave the story about Wounded Knee, where it was found. And Red Hawk was the person whose ledger it was. But anyway, this friend of mine got all these photos and brought them to me. And when we were going through them, we saw this picture here is one of his works, and it's of our relative, the Patewakon Najin. And so we all framed that and put it up at our house. But it tells like it depicts how many horses, how many guns, how many people. And he had the pipe of peace.
So our story begins with Celebrate Dakota shortly after this, because we went to a festival of cultures at Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And we noticed that they always have people from all over the world that work here at Mayo Clinic. And as we were walking, we realized, wait a minute, there's no Indigenous people here. And so we were able to get a hold of one of our friends, Dawn Littleton, helped us to reach the uppers at Mayo, and we explained to them that maybe we should try to have something for Native Americans here at Mayo Clinic, since this was Dakota land. And so luckily they fell for it. And we are still going strong, and I'm happy to have this organization helping us share stories and information and all the beautiful culture that the Dakota and all Native tribes have. This is a picture of Leonard Peltier, our cousin. And then this is a picture of Blossom. Our auntie from Sisseton, South Dakota, was married to Woodrow Wilson Keeble. He was a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient from Korea. And you can watch Eagle Feather Woodrow Wilson Keeble on the internet to see the full story. It's just remarkable about how he actually made it out of Korea.
And also, when we found out we were related to him, the Sisseton Wahpeton tribe invited us to his memorial service that they gave where he got the Congressional Medal of Honor after he had passed quite a few years after. But at the cemetery, the military had the jets fly overhead, and they also had the whole cemetery surrounded with Harley Davidson motorcycles and a big American flag. It was out of this world. And the people said, today we're honoring our Father God, and we're honoring Woody Keeble, but we're not honoring him higher than any of you other veterans. All of you veterans, we are honoring, and we're so glad that God has given the opportunity for people to see that the Dakota people are honorable and well worthy of being honored.
Mhm. Okay, this is a picture of, some people call him he who stands on a cloud, some people call him cut nose, but we call him Makpeya'i Naji. And we went to a conference in Mankato, our first conference when we started our journey. And the first thing we heard out of Dave Larson's mouth was, don't ever go to the Mayo Clinic. And Shirley and I are sitting there thinking, I wonder if they know we work at Mayo Clinic. And they told the story about how the doctors Mayo learned anatomy from the bones of Makpeya'i Naji. And so, and we learned more of the story about that too. And so we were shocked to think that they're telling people that, because there was a big drift between the native people and Mayo. There was a lot of, they just were scared to come here actually and didn't want to get medical care here. I also first went to a meeting in Winona, Minnesota. It was called The Gathering, where they invited all the Dakota they could get on buses. I don't know how many buses they had, but they actually lived in Winona. They had
Their
ancestors lived there. And many of the people that came on the buses said as soon as they got there, they could feel it. It was really touching.
Mhm. And there's after the war, all the Dakota people were exiled from Minnesota.
And it's still on the books, and we're not supposed to be here right now.
So,
But they're too busy in Washington doing other stuff, so they haven't gotten to that part yet.
yeah, and they also let's see, it was so fun to go to these Winona, Minnesota gatherings, because we got to meet a bunch of our Dakota relatives that were from South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, Canada.
Mhm. And they paid
And-
for their hotels and had food. It was really wonderful. And we got to go with a group from the Dakota Unity Alliance and Diversity Foundation to different reservations and got to go to the council meetings. And it was really, really an education. We loved it, every minute of it. This is some of our relatives that we met, Emmett Crawford Eastman and Sid Bird at the Winona Dakota Gathering in September of 2015.
Emmett's related to the Dr. Eastman that was
The first doctor, I think, Dakota doctor.
that helped at Wounded Knee.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and this is a fun story with Dr. Walter Franz from Mayo Clinic. He's a physician here. I'll let Shirley tell the story about how we ended up at the powwow with him.
Yeah, okay, so there's a story about the 7th Cavalry. The Custer's last, what's known as Custer's Last Stand is in Montana, the Little Bighorn and the battle there. And that's where Custer passed away, and they flew the 7th Cavalry flag there, but the Native Americans won the battle. So then what happened after that, many years after, that was in 1876, and in 1890, the 7th Cavalry were the ones who basically mowed down all the Dakota and others at Wounded Knee. That was in 1890. And at that
Battle.
massacre, I would call it, rather than a battle, that's where Red Hawk's ledger was found. But then later, more recently, the 7th Cavalry flag was flown in Iraq, and Dr. Franz from Mayo Clinic took the flag to Iraq. But I heard somebody from Prairie Island was also in that group of people going with Dr. Franz. And so they asked if the Dakota flag could be flown in Iraq as well. So that happened. And they deployed with both of those flags to Iraq. And then when they came home, Dr. Franz asked me and Betty to go to the powwow and the Wachipi, and also help give the flag back to Prairie Island.
And we were afraid to walk in the procession because we said, well, gosh, we weren't in the service. And he said, you are going to go do that right now. And so we got right in line, and we always wondered what those people in the back thought. What the heck? Why are they there? Anyway, it was a very good experience. Shirley's legacy of survival and remembrance and Reconciliation Day in 2012. We'll let her tell the story.
There was a event called the Legacy of Survival, and there was kind of a symbolic kind of a ceremony that happened because the Dakota were exiled from Minnesota in 1863 after the war. Someone decided it would be great if the Minnesota people could welcome the Dakota back into the state. So there was an event organized, and it was at Flandreau and Pipestone, and the
Minnesota and South Dakota.
Minnesota and South Dakota. And at the border, I think it was on Highway 14, they closed the road for a little while, and the Dakota walked back into Minnesota. And there were lots of grandmas, and there were lots of tears and lots of drums. It was a very touching ceremony. And my husband and I brought along to this event 2 of our grandkids, age 7 and age 4. And right when we got there, they were already starting the ceremony. And so a friend of ours that came along told me to get out of the car right now with your grandkids and walk back into Minnesota with them, with all your relatives. So we got out real quick, and somebody took my picture with the 7 and the 4-year-old. And later we realized that our great grandma, I did a little piece of artwork, scribbled it there. She had run away from the Granite Falls area where the where the war started with a 7 and a 4-year-old. And I got to walk back into Minnesota with my grandkids, 7 and 4. It was a very touching situation.
Mhm.
So I really enjoyed that.
We were honored with Mayor Brady. Well, actually, Dr. Patel was our first sponsor at the Celebrate Dakota, and he nominated us, and so we won a Medal of Honor for Diversity in 2015, which was a great big honor for us. This is a picture of Indian Heights Park with our elders and mentors. We gave the mayor a quilt from our mom's reservation, and it was very touching. We had several different programs there for elders to come to Indian Heights Park, and right away when they walked in there, they said they could feel the medicine. And so,
And this is the three of us, Valerie Gomeras, Betty, and I, and we invited 3 Dakota or Lakota men back to do a ceremony at Indian Heights Park because in the past, way back when Rochester was starting, there was a story that the Dakota had asked some of the
farmers,
early
settlers,
to please bury their relatives because they had to leave quickly and they didn't have time to do that and they wanted them buried up here at the Indian Heights Park. So we asked these 3 Dakota men back to Minnesota to give the ceremony 2 years in a row. One was a blessing ceremony and just to bless our relatives that weren't able to go with their people and stayed here and passed away. And also that the next year was
the wiping
the
of the
wiping
tears.
of tears ceremony. And it was, we have copies of the event and they're at the Rochester Public Library and also the History Center of Olmsted County. We had a big feast afterwards and Betty and I and Valerie's husband all helped with it. And these men were saying, how in the world do you get your husbands to help so much? Because they were carrying, doing the doors, doing the chairs, doing the tables and doing the helping with the food. And because they said on the res, the husbands aren't that active to help their wives. Anyway, we said, well, they're so happy. They know that we are happy when we are trying to find our lost relatives and our lost history. And they're just more than happy to help us. And so that's how we did it.
Mhm.
Gave, and became very good friends with the Mayor Brady.
And every year the mayor, now our Mayor Norton, invites us to do display at the government center. And so this is just a picture of a bunch of books we have and the quilt that we gave the mayor and proclamations and maps and educational information. That's what we try to do.
And here was another event that we were in. This was put on by the Scott Hosier Veterans Roundtable, but our very good friend Tom Hosier sponsored it, and Prairie Allen came to do the drums, and they wanted to honor the Native Americans that were in the service in the past. And so they knew we were related to Woody Keeble, so that was part of the program, but also that our mom was in the service. So that's why we had to be up there on the stage with these 2 wonderful men that were both in Vietnam.
Chris LeBeau and Bernie Metler.
Yeah, and they had marvelous stories, but very sad because of all the pain and agony of the days of the Vietnam War.
Mhm. And Mayo had a program, I think we shared our story a little bit with Mayo, and This is kind of hard to read, but I'll read it for you. I think there was maybe a little bit of a snarky comment in the blog where somebody said, just get over it, just get on with your lives and get over it. And this nice gentleman named Carl, we don't know his last name, but he wrote this. I apologize on behalf of all European immigrants for how your nation was treated by us foreign invaders. All cultures are valuable. Please share your culture so that we may know what we tried to destroy. And we just thought that was the greatest thing to have a nice comment like that. We also have a friend who had the magazine with our great-great-grandfather's picture. Her name was is Florestine Renville, and she's from Sisseton, South Dakota. And she came and gave us a poem. She was our friend. She actually did some speaking arrangements here at Mayo, but this is a picture of us in Shirley's front yard. But here's a cute little poem she wrote to Shirley and I'm going to let her read because I cry every time I read it.
She was so happy to meet us and become our friends and our like a family. Living, growing, learning the American way in Minnesota. Dakota spirits rising, gaining strength, shaping survival, ancestral habitation, ancestral footsteps, faintly visible, almost forgotten, but ancestral voices softly utter their name's presence. Spirit to spirit, heart to heart, Dakota sisters hear. Dakota sisters respond. We're still here.
Anyway, it's really cute poem that she wrote to us. Here's a picture. We always were inviting Prairie Island dancers. And so everybody enjoyed seeing the beautiful regalia and dancing. Here's a picture of Karina's son, Corin, and he is really getting to be a good dancer nowadays. He's going places. This is a picture of the Dakota 38+2 honoring in Mankato when Jeff Bolton, who was our sponsor at that time for Mayo Celebrate Dakota, and Jim Miller, the one who had the dream about the Dakota 38, you'll have to YouTube it. Anyway, we had a nice chance for Jeff to apologize to the people that came for the ceremony, and there's more to follow, but there was Valerie and yeah, and this is regarding He Who Walks on a Cloud. Now, this is the story that we need to tell because of the sad history of Mayo. Valerie was able to talk to Art Owen. Gee, I forgot my thing here. Art Owen. Okay, Art Owen talked with Roger Trudell, who was the tribal chair. Art Owen was a respected spirit leader from Prairie Island, and Roger Trudell was from Santee, where Makpea A. Najee's family was from. And Art's request, he arranged with Roger Trudell to have a dinner and a giveaway. And the giveaway is always given. It's like a thank you for the people that came, and it's very special. And since Valerie's grandma, this was her reservation and people, she paid for the dinner, and Jeff purchased blankets to give to the elders of the family. And Jeff, I guess, did a wonderful presentation and talked with the family and issued an apology. The family accepted it, and Mayo shared with them that they wanted to create a special scholarship in his name, and they accepted that as well. And so we're just so thankful that we are able to continue our journey. And this is one of the things we decided, if you don't know where you came from, how can you know where you're going? And I always liked William Shakespeare's words that, and it's very true, give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers the o'erfraught heart and bids its break. And so
Our Dakota elders and spiritual leaders and the elders and the educators, they always said the most important thing is that we learn how to forgive. So as we're learning all about the good and the bad history with the Dakota, that we need to give space to have a clear and pure situation within us. So if we can learn to forgive, not necessarily forgetting, but forgiving, so that the more you learn, and this is our experience, the more we learn about the good and the bad, the more peaceful we are about who we are and where we came from. And during our journey, we always considered ourselves not knowing anything because we didn't grow up with the culture or the history. But as we went on, we tried to involve the whole community and put on events where we could learn with our community instead of just learning by ourselves. It's been a wonderful journey.
Thank you very much. This ends our little talk. Does anyone have any questions?
All right. Thank you both. I'm just figuring out how to turn back on my video here. Thank you, Grandma Shirley and Betty, for being with us today. I know we had a good chunk of people that had to jump off at the top of the hour, but we still have quite a bit hanging in there. Just a lot of comments. I'm not sure if you see it on your end. Doesn't look like you see it on your end, but there's a lot of thank yous from everyone for sharing your story. I think a lot of people have been able to relate, like it's very relatable to a lot of our participants out there. So thank you again. I think it's a powerful story. I've heard it a few times, but I always learn more every time both are presenting, and it's really great to be here with you today. Let me see, actually, we're still on yours. Sharing. All right, there we go. Okay, and we did have one question that I'm gonna go ahead and let Trudy, my colleague down in Arizona, also was able to join us, but she can take the question in our chat.
Hi, everyone. The question is, that video is from,
Hold on, Trudy, hold on really.
yes,
There you go.
okay, that video is from an individual stream. Can you briefly explain what happened to the 38, please?
The 38. Okay. Well,
Okay, and can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, and then the men were taken and they had gosh, it was like a court hearing really fast. First of all, I'm sure the Dakota didn't understand any English, and so they were having these war things trying to figure out, because I think they had 350 men, and Lincoln somehow cut it down to 38 that he thought were responsible for starting the war. And so they were taken and they were hung in Mankato. And so I know that I grew up thinking Lincoln was the most wonderful, in school you learn how wonderful he was. And I remember I was absolutely floored when I heard he was the one who gave the order to have 38 hung. And we have heard that one of them wasn't even Native American, that he was a white man, but of course he was out in the sun a lot like us and was tan and looked like an Indian. And so anyway, it's quite a sad story, how all the grave, they buried them, the 38, but at night they came and doctors from around the community, even in Chicago, I heard, came and got bodies from the graves. And that's where William Worrell Mayo took the body of Cut Nose, or He Who Walks on a Cloud. And so anyway, it was just quite if you get a chance to watch the Dakota 38, it tells the whole story. It's very, very touching. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I see one more question. So I see one more question in the chat, and it just asks, do you still collaborate with Valerie for cultural events and cultural support at Mayo? There you go. Okay, yes, Valerie has been very, very instrumental in our journey. She actually grew up with her people and learned way more than we did. So we always go to her when we need help. But we all, okay, we had started Celebrate Dakota, but since Mayo has certain restrictions on organizing money and stuff, we decided to do a 401c3 with Valerie, and it's called Greater Rochester Area Dakota Supporters. And we were actually, Valerie is very, very good at writing different for grants. So we have received many grants for the grads and able to do things with the library, with the park department, with the history center, all over. We've even taken backpacks out to the reservations for the kids. So she's been very instrumental, and I hope our journey continues a long time with her. All right, thank you, Betty. Trudy, you want to get that next question?
Let me see. The next question is, thank you so much for sharing. How have your Norwegian relatives responded to all that you have learned, to all the learning and stories?
Oh my, well, I know our cousin who didn't know about us being Dakota, he really enjoyed hearing the stories. He passed away last year, so unfortunately, but we have some other cousins on the Norwegian side, and we have shared stories with them, but we haven't shared our full story with them. So we should do that sometime. Now I'll tell them it's on the YouTube. They can watch it on there. But we always feel like we're wearing two hats because we have the Norwegian side and then we have the Dakota side and the Ojibwe and the Cree. And so it's I know on several of our trips that we went with Scott Hosier or Tom Hosier had us go on trips with him all over where the Minnesota War took place. And people on the bus, we would hear them talking, and we always wanted to go so we could make sure they're getting the full story, because a lot of them were not native, and they wanted to learn the history of the Civil War, the wars. And so we always were there to correct them if they had something that was incorrect, the way they were talking or whatever. And so we felt very honored to be able to go with them.
Mhm.
All right, I'm just gonna jump in with you guys since I'm sitting next to you.
Mhm.
It might be easier, but is there anything else, Trudy? Or was that the last question? Or do you have anything to add, Trudy?
Oh,
Can't hear her.
Oh, you're on mute, Trudy.
Sorry. The only thing I wanted to add was this is very informative for me because I remember when I joined Mayo 4 years ago, one of the questions that was brought up to me by a former Mayo employee was, um, you will get questioned about the history by Native people that know the history of what happened between the natives and Mayo. And to actually hear both of you, you really opened my eyes now over, because oh, when I'm doing outreach out in the native community, I always highlight the different services that we offer over to the natives. But then sometimes I get natives who know the history.
Oh, yeah.
And then they'll ask me like, do you know, what type of an organization you're working for that has done this to Native people? You know, so 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 that is one thing having to hear both of you really made me have a much better understanding now. So I just wanted to thank you too, Over, for sharing that because you two both hold some valuable history information, which, in our Native community, we always love to embrace our elders that share and to share their knowledge. So I just want to say thank you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know we've had many times, well, first of all, we didn't know the full story either. And so we learned it along with from the elders and things. But I know that many times we have given a talk and people will come up to us and say, I want to learn my history now. And so I think that's really neat that, we're all able to do it. And the one nice thing is with the reconciliation that Valerie worked with the tribe from Santee, they accepted the apology and that they were able to forgive too. So that's the one thing that we've always learned, that you have to forgive. It hurts your heart if you don't.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So thank you for saying that again, Betty. It looks like we have someone who might be a friend of yours, but they just posted a comment that said, Pam told me that when you were kids and visited your grandparents, she always wondered why your grandparents lived with so many Indians.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know the one thing Shirley saw when we were going there, we would go visit our grandma and grandpa every summer. And we didn't know they lived on a reservation.
Yeah. When we were teenagers, probably 14 or so, we were driving down the highway to Grandpa's house, and I saw this great big sign that says, "You are now entering the reservation, the Dakota Sioux Reservation." And I'm like, "What?" I said, "We're not going to a reservation." We didn't know. We didn't even know all the time we went there that they were on a reservation.
Wow.
They were just by themselves on a little tiny area.
Mhm. But the thing that was different from Sisseton is that in Devil's Lake, or Spirit Lake is what it's called now, they were kind of separated from the elders, so they didn't learn all that history.
Well,
Um,
their family,
from
our
their-
family didn't.
Our family didn't. And so,
So-
it was really refreshing to see the way Sisseton handled everything because they were with their elders. They knew the history, they knew the plants, they knew the language, they knew everything. And it was like, wow, I want to move there sometime so I can learn some more things from my cousins there. But they took us out to this prairie and they showed us these little turnips that the natives always would dig up and use for soup and stuff. And they were showing us all these herbs and stuff, and they just have such a wealth of information. So I feel so sad that I wasn't able to learn it when I was little, but I'm trying to learn it now.
Yeah, it's a continuous lifelong journey. So your
Mhm.
story really shows that you're, every year you're learning something new about your family history, about yourself, and you're reconnecting and finding those lost relatives that you may not have had connection with in the past or when you were younger. So it's really awesome to hear that you guys are, continuing to go out there and continuing to do your research and really understand the history, your history and your family. So thank you again for sharing. I think somebody in the chat earlier had said they pretty much could sit here all day just listening to you guys talk. And it's true. If we
And we could sit here all day too.
So it's been good. I mean, it sounds like people learned a lot today, especially about the histories, with Mayo, the Dakota 38. So thank you for bringing that conversation to the table. It's important to continue to educate our communities. And hopefully, I'm pretty sure we're going to hear more from you all. So thank you again for sharing that. I did post in our chat our YouTube channel. So this presentation will be available on the YouTube playlist probably in about a week. It takes a while to edit and everything, but it should show up there. Somebody did ask, could we receive the PowerPoint to share on YouTube?
Oh, it'll be on you.
Well, it will be on YouTube. You
Mhm.
should be able to see the PowerPoint. We wouldn't be able to share the PowerPoint slides. It's a big file, so we already had trouble uploading it, but we figured it out. So thank you again, everyone. And please, if you're able to complete our very short survey to provide feedback, would be amazing for you to do that.